Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, Chapter 10. A Warm Welcome. The day grew lighter and warmer as they floated along. After a while, a river rounded a steep shoulder of land that came down upon their left. Under its rocky feet, like an inland cliff, the deepest stream had flowed, lapping and bubbling. Suddenly the cliff fell away. The shore sank. The trees ended. Then Bilbo saw a sight. The land opened wide about him, filled with waters of the river, which broke up and wandered in 100 winding courses, or halted in marshes and pools dotted with isles on every side. But still a strong water flowed on steadily through the mist. And far away, a stark head in a torn cloud, there loomed the mountain. Its nearest neighbors to the northeast and the tumbled land that joined it to them could not be seen. All alone it rose and looked across marshes to the forest. The lonely mountain. Bilbo had come far and through many adventures to see it, and now he did not like the look of it in the least. He listened to the talk of raftmen and pieced together the scraps of information they let fall. He soon realized that he was very fortunate ever to have seen it at all, even from this distance. Dreary as had been his imprisonment and unpleasant as was his position, to say nothing of the poor dwarfs underneath him, still he had been more lucky than he had guessed. The talk was all of the trade that came and went on the waterways and the growth of traffic on the river as the roads out of the east towards Mirkwood vanished or fell into disuse. Of the bickerings of the lakemen and the wood elves about the upkeep of the forest river and the care of the banks. Those lands had changed much since the days when dwarfs dwelt in the mountain, days which most people now remembered only as a very shadowy tradition. They had changed even in recent years, and since the last news that Gandalf had of them. Great floods and rains had swollen the waters that flowed east, and there had been an earthquake or two, which some were inclined to attribute to the dragon, alluding to him chiefly with a curse and ominous nod in the direction of the mountain. The marshes and the bogs had spread wider and wider on the either side. Paths had vanished, and many a rider and wanderer too, if they had tried to find the lost ways across. The elf road through the wood, which the dwarfs had followed on the advice of Beorn, now came to a doubtful and little used end at the eastern edge of the forest. Only the river offered any longer a safe way from the skirts of Mirkwood in the north to the mountain-shadowed plains beyond, and the river was guarded by the wood elves' king. So you see, Bilbo had come in the end by the only road that was any good. It might have been some comfort to Mr. Baggins shivering on the barrels if he had known that the news of this had reached Gandalf far away and given him great anxiety, and that he was in fact finishing his other business, which does not come into this tale, and getting ready to come in search of Thorin's company. But Bilbo did not know it. All he knew was that the river seemed to go on and on and on forever, and he was hungry, and he had nasty cold in the nose, and did not like the way mountains seemed to frown at him and threaten him as it drew even nearer. After a while, however, the river took a more southerly course, and the mountain receded again, and at last, late in the day, the shores grew rocky. The river gathered all its wandering waters together into deep and rapid flood, and they swept along at great speed. Um, I digress. Actually, when the river is particularly deep, the flood is not rapid. It's actually when it's shallow and rocky, it is rapid. But we'll allow J.R.R. Tolkien that. Okay, coming back. The sun had set when, turning with another sweep towards the east, the forest river rushed into the long lake. There it had a wide mouth with stony cliff-like gates at the either side, whose feet were piled with shingles. The long lake. Bilbo had never imagined that any water that was not the sea could be so big. It was so wide that the opposite shore looked small and far, but it was so long that its northerly end, which pointed towards the mountain, could not be seen at all. Only from the map did Bilbo know that away up there, where the stars of Valin were already twinkling, the running river came down into the Lake of Dale, and with the forest river filled with deep waters, what must once have been a great deep rocky valley. At the southern end, the doubled waters poured out again over high waterfalls and ran away hurriedly to unknown lands. In the still evening air, the noise of the falls could be heard like a distant roar. Not far from the mouth of the forest river was the strange town he heard the elves speak of in the king's cellars. It was not built on the shore, though there were a few huts and buildings there, but right out on the surface of the lake, protected from the swirls of the entering river by promontory of a rock which formed a calm bay. By promontory of a rock which formed a calm bay. A great bridge made of wood ran out to where, on the huge piles made of forest trees, was built a busy wooden town. Not a town of elves, but of men, who still dare to dwell here under the shadow of distant Dragon Mountain. They still throw on the trade that came up the great river from south and was carted past the falls to their town. But in the great days of old, when Dell in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful, and there had been fleets of boats on the waters, and some were filled with gold, and some with warriors in the armor, and there had been wars and deeds, which were now only a legend. The rotting piles of a greater town could still be seen along the shores when the water sank in a drought. But men remembered little of all that, though some still sang old songs of dwarf kings of the mountain. Thorir and Thrain of the race of Durian, and of the coming of the dragon and the fall of lords of Dale. Some sang too that Thor and Thrain would come back one day, and gold would flow in rivers through the mountain gates, and all that land would be filled with new song and new laughter. But this pleasant legend did not much affect their daily business. As soon as the raft of barrels came in sight, boats rowed out from piles of the town, and voices hailed the raft steerers. Then ropes were cast and oars were pulled, and soon the raft was drawn out of the current of the forest river and towed away round the high shoulders of rock into little bay of Lake Town. There it was moored not far from shoreward head of Great Bridge, Soon men would come up from the south and take some of the casks away, and others they would fill with goods they had brought to be taken back up the stream to the wood elves' home. In the meanwhile, the barrels were left afloat, while the elves of the raft and the boatmen went to feast in Lake Town. They would have been surprised if they could have seen what happened down by the shore after they had gone and the shades of night had fallen. First of all, a barrel was cut loose by Bilbo and pushed to the shore and opened. Groans came from inside, and out crept a most unhappy dwarf. Wet straw was in his drenched beard. He was so sore and stiff, so bruised and buffeted, he could hardly stand or stumble through the shadow water to lie groaning on the shore. He had a famished and savage look like a dog that has been chained and forgotten in the kennel for a week. It was Thorin, but you could only have told it by his golden chain and by the color of his now dirty and tattered sky blue hood with its tarnished silver tassel. It was some time before he would be even polite to the hobbit.